welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul Dirienzo.
And I'm Miss Joan Marie Musi.
And our guest is Philip Van Aver. Welcome, Philip, to Let Them Talk again.
Or welcome back.
Welcome back. And you're going to be here again to talk about...
I'm going to be talking this evening about the historic district that the Landmarks Preservation Commission of New York City announced publicly about 2 weeks ago.
Great, and that's what's behind us, by the way, on the screen is a map of that district. The gray areas, which you can see somewhat behind us, are the areas that are included in the district, and we'll go into the details of just where that is. But let's begin from the beginning, Philip Van Aver. What is neighborhood preservation, and well, I didn't think anything got preserved in New York.
I'm going to begin by talking about the Landmarks Preservation Commission,
yes,
which is a mayoral agency, and that is commissioner, in this case Robert Tierney, is appointed by Mayor Bloomberg.
So it's part of the city government.
Yeah, exactly. And the Landmarks Preservation Commission was established in 1965. Mm-hmm. And as many of you know, if you're interested at all in the history of New York, just prior to that, Penn Station was demolished. And that resulted in a great outcry among people who wished for the important landmarks of our city to be preserved. Now, the Landmarks Preservation Commission operates with a, we'll discuss this more in detail. The regulations cover 160 pages of regulations.
Wow. So it's not like a loose thing.
No, it's very, very precise what they can designate and the procedure for doing this. Now, as Paul mentioned, the historic district was announced for the neighborhood that all of us happen to live in. That is the Lower East Side, especially the area referred to as the East Village. Now, this district, though there are at least 300 buildings.
Yeah,
now,
what does it mean to have a historic district as opposed to one landmark?
Yes, well, actually, in law, there's no difference between a historic district and an individual landmark. They still have the same level of protection. Now then, however, a historic district, the buildings have to be contiguous. In other words, they have to be joined together. So even sites that would not be designated separately are included. Now, I want to outline for those of for all those who are watching the show that this essentially is like a lower Second Avenue Manhattan district. It begins at St. Mark's Place, and it runs to, now St. Mark's Place is equivalent of 8th Street, right, to 2nd Street, and it runs from almost Avenue A to 3rd Avenue and Bowery, and it includes, for instance, I live on East 6th Street between A and B, and it begins on 6th Street, just slightly west of Avenue A, and it runs all the way to 3rd Avenue, but on different sides of the streets. Now,
so it's not a perfect rectangle.
Not at all. It's very much of a gerrymander, right, jigsaw puzzle kind of affair.
As you can see behind us, folks are watching it right now, and you can see it.
It includes important churches like St. Stanislaus Church, which is on 7th Street between A and 1st, and the adjoining buildings on both sides of the block.
But the Landmarks Commission oversees the entire 5 boroughs.
Correct.
And different areas that have been designated.
The first historic district, if I'm correct, was Brooklyn Heights, and then Greenwich Village, and there's an Upper East Side historic district. And on Mother's Day, I attended a Mother's Day party out in Cobble Hill, and I discovered that this Warren Street was in the historic district. But this district is a little bit unusual because of the fact that it has been described as the first historic district that was created to designate a primarily immigrant neighborhood.
Oh, that's interesting.
You see, and now the procedure was the group that I represent, Lower East Side Preservation Initiative, we met. Our organization has only been in existence for since 2007, and I've been working with them since 2008. But we were invited by the senior staff of the Landmarks Preservation Commission to meet with them at the end of February 28th. And so we were told that what the district was, the one which I more or less outlined very briefly, and I confirmed that some of the sites were in fact going to be included.
Yeah, how did they decide which blocks? How is that done?
Now this was partially done in accordance with what I meant, the 160 page document indicating what they could designate.
So it has to do with significant buildings and where they are on the block.
And how intact they are. They have to be, for instance, cornices, like you're dealing with, in many cases you're dealing with old townhouses or tenements.
So it can only have been altered a certain amount.
Yeah, if all the ornament originally has been stripped away, or if...
Which is not uncommon.
Yeah, it's just a box.
Exactly. I mean, if those of us who live near 14th Street, like 14th Street in Manhattan, in the area of east of Fifth Avenue, most of the existing townhouses have lost all their ornament. So the commission had to choose a neighborhood where the majority of it were intact, even though the individual sites were not particularly outstanding. And now one of the streets that was included is 5th Street between 2nd and 3rd, and that's a street which has very little businesses on it, but it has a mix of tenements from they're what are called old law tenements and new law tenements, which were established in 1900. It has a mix of those and townhouses, and that characterizes this historic district is a mixture of different periods of architecture. But included in it, for instance, on 7th Street between 2nd and 3rd, there's the Hebrew Actors Union, which in itself is not a marvelous example, though a very nice building, which was converted from a townhouse, but it is very significant historically for the Yiddish theater in New York.
Okay, so architecture is not the only criterion.
Well, it has to be the major criteria because, for instance, you cannot designate a building just because a famous person lived there. I mean, I would love to designate some of the wonderful buildings where Allen Ginsberg lived, or there are 5 different residences that he lived on the Lower East Side, but they cannot be designated simply because he lived there.
Particular celebrity or well-known person.
And now I wanted to backtrack. I first heard that Landmarks Preservation Commission had undertaken a study of the Lower East Side. I first heard about this in 2006, and the commission had been working on this with interns mostly for 2 years before that, and so it's only now that they have.
Well, I wanted to ask, are we the last neighborhood to get a historic district in the city?
Well,
and if so, why?
Well, there is another historic district. Those of you familiar with the area, it's called the St. Mark's Church Historic District on 10th Street. But that was a district of upper income properties that were built for wealthy people, mostly in the 1850s. So what you say is actually correct. For a long time, I always said when I testified at the Landmarks Preservation Commission for the sites that were being considered for designation, I said there was a hole in the landmark map, because our neighborhood was not well represented, and this historic district goes a long way in. Well, it doesn't go all the way because those of us who are involved in this effort consider this phase 1.
Okay.
And
It should be larger.
yeah, especially around Tompkins Square Park. We would like to create a Tompkins Square Park. There's also...
Is there any area around Tompkins Square Park that's included? I thought 10th Street was included.
Well, you're absolutely right, Paul. Now, that is not, strictly speaking, in the historic district.
see.
That is not...
But it does seem to jut east up at the top there.
At the meeting, which we attended, the head of our organization, Lesby, Richard Moses, he suggested rather boldly, I was going to say, thinking if he keeps talking about this, we'll never be invited back. But in fact, that was included, the entire block from Avenue B to Avenue A, even though some of the buildings do not meet the criteria which I just described. But we would like to add other buildings around the park. There are ones that are already, but this proposal has the backing of the city administration as far as we know. Now,
and when would this go into effect? Or it already has?
Well, no. This is a multi-stage procedure.
I see.
And the last Thursday, on the 12th of May, the Landmarks Preservation Commission did a presentation at the Landmark Subcommittee of Community Board 3, and now there was not a vote was not taken. You see, one of the reasons why I mentioned the date of the establishment of the commission was that in 1965 the community boards did not exist as they do today. So there is nothing in law that requires the Landmark Preservation Commission to present the community board with its proposals, whether for historic districts or individual sites. But the next step is for the Landmarks Preservation Commission to what they call calendar. That is to
schedule,
set a date for a hearing at their offices on the municipal building.
Now, how can people find out if, say, they would want to go to one of the meetings or want to get involved?
Now they can access the Landmarks Preservation Commission website, which lists the calendars, and then that's the way that.
So just Google or search for Landmark Preservation.
Right, or city government or 311.
And see what's up and down. Now, I have from the time that I first heard about this, the 28th of February, I was very concerned with opposition because we have some very politically powerful groups
that don't want this.
Yeah, whose buildings are
cited. Why
cited.
would someone not want this?
Well, one of the reasons, some of it is based on they are kind of Tea Party types. They don't believe that government should be involved in this. They consider that...
Well, would it put restrictions, say, on a building owner? Or?
Well, one of the aspects of this proposal is that it is limited to an area which already has zoning restrictions and a height cap. So the possibility of building anything of any size on these side streets is very minimal.
It's already
and on the area of Second Avenue, the only First Avenue has one or two minor sites, as I understand it. But First Avenue includes, there's a building that belongs to NYU. We don't know what position NYU is taking. Some of the synagogues are very reluctant to be designated without going into detail about some of these controversies which I have witnessed. And we have churches which are very, very opposed to this, more out of fear than out of any genuine
well, what is the threat to them? Yeah, what is the disadvantage to them? There'd be greater restrictions on what they could do construction-wise with altering their building?
Well, you see, now the commercial, the buildings in the proposed district, which already have commercial on the ground floor. Now, there are some restrictions but this is very flexible as to what kind of signage that they can use. I mean,
and what about renovations of their buildings?
Now renovations is interesting
rules
because
about that.
I mentioned going out to the Mother's Day party out in Gobble Hill, and the family I was visiting, their house is designated. It's an 1830 Federal style townhouse.
Oh, beautiful.
And when I was given directions, I said, my friend said, it's the blue house. Well, my friends said, if we want to paint our house over again, it has to be blue.
Oh, that's interesting.
Who built it? A Lennox or a Tilden or?
No, it was probably built by some developer in 1830.
For a nameless rich person.
Yes,
not one of the more named.
No, it's not it's a very substantial upper middle class house. But I'm just using the blue. I mean,
well, there's usually a person. There's usually a name and a history behind a building that was built in 1830.
That is not relevant to landmark.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that.
That's something which people when they're approaching.
Well, what about the?
Let me finish it.
Sorry.
When they're approaching the Landmark Commission, they'll say Joel Gray lived here,
right.
or somebody like that, or Diane DePrima, the beat poet, and I was involved in the designation of 151 Avenue B, where Charlie Parker lived. But when I testified, I didn't say anything about Charlie Parker. I just talked about the architecture, and that is very much going back to this 160-page document.
How about the history?
What are the historic bases that work? Because you said that the Hebrew acting school was sufficient.
Acting Union.
Acting Union was sufficient historic basis because the building's not that architecturally interesting.
I don't really know too much about the building. I wrote it up for a study that I was doing.
No, but I meant
and it's beautifully intact. It has beautiful masks of comedy and tragedy. It has some very nice bronze plaques on it.
So it still was the architectural basis. It wasn't a historical basis.
It had been calendared by LPC at one time. In other words, I don't know why they didn't take any action on it. There was some conflict with the landlord, but it falls into the historic. It's not associated with one person. It's part of the history of
its role in the American Revolution. Its role in
this is Yiddish theater.
Yeah, right, or Yiddish theater.
So the
getting back into all this,
would be something broader than just an individual person that lived there.
Yes,
it would have to be like its place in a continuum.
You know that, for instance, Iggy Pop lived at Christodoro House, I think. I think he was the person.
That's enough right there. They should.
But that's not a reason for Christodoro House.
So did the head of the IMF.
I mean, Christodoro House is a large apartment tower overlooking Tompkins Square Park. But I'm just saying, when CBGB's was closed, there was a great movement to try to landmark that building, and it was not met with too much enthusiasm by Landmarks Preservation Commission, though CBGB's is sort of a temple of punk rock.
Right. Its place in the history of rock isn't sufficient for them.
And one of the criteria of the commission is the building has to be 30 years old.
That's interesting. So there is some specific numbers involved.
Yes. But this process that is ongoing it first involved notifying all the landlords, all the property owners.
That this is a possibility.
Yes, this is one of the reasons why our group was not supposed to publicize that. They would have been very upset if I had been on this show a month ago.
Right. Because they had too many people to tell.
Talking about this. I mean, I think they would not have been pleased. So, because the idea is that the property owners should find out about it first, and then there was a property owners meeting, which was held at 41 Cooper Square, which is a new Cooper Union building, but only about 50 landlords or their representatives in total showed up, and they kind of at the most, and there wasn't a lot of opposition. Now as I mentioned before, we may have when I say we, I mean the preservation, the community, and the Landmarks Preservation Commission. For instance, the Catholic Archdiocese may not be pleased to have St. Stanislaus Church.
Well, can I ask a question about sort of the general theory of preservation? Like in any given city, what percentage would be the ideal amount to preserve? Do you see what I mean? Is there like a given rule, like say a quarter of old buildings and 3/4 should be turned over and made like as a modern building, or is there a ratio that's sort of a given in the world of preservation?
I don't believe in museum city. I mean, I like freezing everything, but people come to New York for a variety of reasons. People come to the neighborhood where we live, the Tompkins Square Park, because it isn't because they're coming to see an individual architectural treasure, but they like the all-over feeling of it, and the fact that it's not phony. It's not like South Street Seaport, which is kind of phony and dolled up. This is a very real a neighborhood, and
I just wondered if across the board, like in Chicago, New York, there's like sort of a ratio.
Unfortunately, for good or bad, I spend most of my time in New York, and I sometimes on TV I see pictures of other cities which look to me to be, the downtown areas look desolate, and
Chicago's a little different. They're very much into preservation in Chicago, but
I mean, I'm just picking random things to say.
But other
is there
cities
like
aren't.
a general trend in the world of preservation to say
that?
Well,
one of the trends, it's a term which I started using a few years ago. I picked it up from a guidebook on Venice. And they talked about streetscapes, not just maintaining individual marvelous palazzos.
I see, but a region for character.
For instance, one of the proposals for change of this, the additions to the historic district, which we were discussing, was some of you may know the Pyramid Club on Avenue A. The Pyramid Club was built as a German social club in the 1880s, and it's remarkably well preserved. But we also want to preserve the adjoining buildings, which have their cornices, their old brick building. They're not individually distinguished, but they create, in conjunction with the a Pyramid Club, this streetscape idea, and that has caught on quite a bit.
I see. Rather than going after one building to say this area should be preserved.
Now, what about this horrid thing they're doing now of allowing buildings to keep their facade and yet building humongous structures on the roofs of them and claiming that somehow that's the same building, even though it's not. I mean, there's buildings that have roofs there's 5 stories, but the back they're like 8, 9 stories tall.
Well, originally this started being done. I think the first building of this sort I was with P.J. Clark's, which some of you know is an old pub on the. It was like and then when it on was it 3rd Avenue, 1st Avenue. I've been there, but I've not. Right. It's been quite a few years. But that was a building which was kind of facaded, or they actually built around it. And there was instances, and of course I suppose is better than demolishing the original structure. But most of us in preservation feel rather. It's very problematic. It's very problematic, and
it's an end run. It seems like an end run around the intent of the people.
Well, there are always conflicting interests, and the point
finding the balance.
The point of one thing I've always believed in is trying to get buildings designated before the bulldozers arrive.
Yeah.
Because once somebody has acquired title to a building and has gone to the buildings department for permits, it's a little bit late in the game. And the point of having groups like my organization, LESPI, and you're going to read the...
yeah, it's lespi-nyc.org if you want to check out the Lower East Side Preservation Initiative.
And you see, one of the purposes of our organization is to study the area, the East Village, northern part of the Lower East Side, and come up with a proposal to preserve existing buildings. I mean, because, as I said before, once someone has purchased a property with the idea of development, you are really, it's very, very difficult to successfully get a designation. Mm-hmm. So organizations like LESPI and Greenwich Village Society of Historic Preservation and Historic Districts Council basically work to have buildings designated. Now the process of getting a building designated, I mean, any of you out there could do this with a building in your neighborhood. You put together a study of the building, and you what is called a request for evaluation. That's the first step in going to the commission.
And who do you call to do that?
Well, we
don't have a lot of time. Just where's the first phone number?
You go to the website. You go to the website, and the website...
Or any city government thing, you can call 311, because they'll direct you to the right...
Yes, because this is the procedure today, and
okay, just in our last minute, the last question I want to ask you, Philip Van Aver, thank you again for coming on Let Them Talk. An immigrant neighborhood, preserving an immigrant neighborhood. Most immigrants want to get out of the neighborhood that they immigrated into the rest of New York, and that's why they've never been preserved.
Of course, I was thinking about this, and I would say that most neighborhoods in New York are immigrant neighborhoods.
Yeah.
But I think it was a way of justifying the mix of townhouses that were built for middle-class people, and plus tenements were built for the people who worked in the sweatshops of New York City. Mm-hmm. And also, for instance, one of the sites is a synagogue. It's called a tenement synagogue. It's on 6th Street. It's the People of Masaryk Synagogue, which was founded in 1888, and the building was built in 1910. But that was for an immigrant neighborhood, or the immigrant congregation. It was not a fancy synagogue.
Okay, so it's keeping a little bit of our history alive in Lower East Side. Thank you very much, Philip Van Aver, for joining us.
All right.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week. Thank you very much for joining us on Let Them Talk.